Marxism is all about revolution. It's about destruction. Marx's favorite saying came from Dr. Faust, written by Goethe, and that is, everything that exists deserves to be destroyed.
Keeping our republic is on the line, and it requires patriots with great passion, dedication, and eternal vigilance to preserve our freedoms. Jenny Beth Martin is the co-founder of Tea Party Patriots. She is an author, a filmmaker, and one of Time Magazine's most influential people in the world. But the title she is most proud of is mom to her boy-girl twins. She has been at the forefront, fighting to protect America's core principles for more than a decade. Welcome to the Jenny Beth Show.
In today's episode, I'm joined by Mike Gonzalez, Senior Fellow at the Heritage Foundation and author of several books on Marxism and socialism. We'll dive into his firsthand experiences growing up in communist Cuba and discuss the real threats Marxism poses to America today. Now, join me as we explore what's at stake for our freedoms and how we can fight back against this failed ideology. Mike, thanks so much for joining me today. I'm so glad that we're able to have this discussion.
Jenny Beth, it's a joy to be on with you. You're a real patriot. I've always admired what you do, and I have admired you.
Well, thank you very much. So you know and understand socialism and communism and Marxism firsthand, don't you, from your life experiences?
Yeah, I mean, first, I've written about it. I've written books about Marxism. You go at it both ways. One is I spent the first 12 years of my life in Cuba, about 3 of them going to communist schools. Left at the age of 12. You can tell quickly by looking at me that's not exactly last week that I left. But I've also, so you have that experience, and that experience is very valuable. But you also have the experience of researching it and writing books about it. You know, somebody once said, if you want to know what somebody else thinks, read. If you want to know what you think, write. So writing books on Marxism, especially the last one that I co-wrote with Katharine Gorka, NextGen Marxism, what it is and how to combat it, that really gives you the arguments that you need to identify Marxism and combat it.
Okay, and I want to talk about that some, and I may have additional questions to go back to about what it was like in those first 12 years in Cuba. But first, let's go through your book. So this is the latest book. You've written other books as well, correct?
That's right. Yes, this is my fourth book.
That's amazing. Thank you for writing so many books and warning America about the problems we face. So what is NextGen Marxism?
NextGen Marxism starts with Marx. We could have started with the French Revolution, and I know we only have an hour. You could start with the devil, the cause of all this. But you start with Marxism pure and simple, 1848, the manifesto written by Marx and Engels. And then you have the evolution of into cultural Marxism in the 1920s, when they realized, communists realized that Marx's economic determinism was not really applicable, was not really how man thought and how man behaved. So they became cultural. They thought, well, the culture is the way to make humans into Marxists. And then when that is brought to America and flourishes here in the 1960s, we add, the problems that we have, which is really over race. Race is a big issue in this country, and the proletariat, the worker, is no longer the locus of revolution. Is no longer the revolutionary, the man, the agent that the intellectuals thought were going to overthrow the system. It becomes what Herbert Marcuse, one of the philosophers of this whole idea, called people, the ghetto population. I'm quoting him directly, and I'm going to quote him directly again, people of other races and other colors. So that then become, they think, this is all messed up, but they think that people of minority races or the members of the marginalized groups, whether they're cast in racial or sexual categories, are going to be the new revolutionaries. That last part is NextGen Marxism. That's the crux of NextGen Marxism.
Why is it important when people talk about Marxism to talk about revolutions? Why is it a cultural revolution, or that these are the people who need to implement the revolution in America? What does that mean exactly? And is it a revolution like Americans who grew up in America might think of the Revolutionary War if they're my age, or is it something different?
Your age is very young. Marxism is all about revolution. It's about destruction. It really is about destruction. Marx's favorite saying came from Dr. Faust, written by Goethe, and that is, everything that lives everything that exists deserves to be destroyed. And that is really the crux of Marxism. And Marx in the manifesto wrote that there would be constant revolutions in which the oppressed, in his day, the worker, the proletariat, would rise up and overthrow the bourgeois, kill him, rape his wife and children, and overthrow the system, overthrow capital, overthrow capitalism. But if you even when that gets transferred to cultural Marxism, it's all about revolution. It's because we live in a system, especially here in America, that is capitalist and democratic. We have parliamentary democracy, representative democracy, and they need to destroy that. They say very clearly they want to destroy representative democracy, which they don't like, and the system of capitalism, which is just a word for freedom, right? I own this phone, Jenny Beth, and you want to buy this phone, Jenny Beth, and you and I haggle on a price, and we finally come to a price at which we both walk away happy. That's capitalism, freedom. They don't like that, and they want to overthrow it through revolt.
Why is it important to overthrow it? Why do they have to destroy everything?
Because they say, and you have to take some of them. You have to take them at their word. They say that the system doesn't work. They don't think the system works. Of course, their system really doesn't work. I've lived through it, and we have the experience of other people who have lived through it. God, in His infinite wisdom, has even given us laboratory experiments of the same people, the same culture, the same DNA, one capitalist, one communist. I'm talking about East Germany and West Germany, and North Korea and South Korea. And in both those cases, South Korea and West Germany were free, places where people lived happy lives, and East Germany and North Korea were dysfunctional places where people were put in gulags. They think, so that's how their system doesn't work. But they think that our system is very bad at redistributing resources, that supermarkets throw away a lot of food every night, and yet you see homeless people who want food. They say that is something that needs to be destroyed completely, and a new system needs to be put in its place.
And when they put the new system in the place, what is it that they think that they're going to put in? And just elaborate on what they want to replace it with.
Jenny Beth, you ask really good questions. They're very they keep that very hidden. Once you study Marxism, you realize that it is a thing that they don't reveal a lot of what their plans are. They're very clear about what they want to destroy, and then the utopia, quote unquote utopia, they want to replace it with, is very nebulous. We know in what happens on the ground. You have collectivism and central planning, and gulags, as I said, and repression, and freedom. All the basic natural rights, whether it's freedom of speech, life, freedom of association, everything is quashed, and that is really what is replaced with. They will tell you that is replaced with an intermediary period in which there's the dictatorship of the proletariat, and you have a dictatorship where the government owns everything. But that will go away, and we will not even need government, and we will live without government. Marx speaks beautifully and stirringly of fishing in the morning, writing poetry in the afternoon, and drinking wine in the evening. It's all. Well, I can't curse, but it's not.
You can if you need to.
No, I can find. I have a good vocabulary. I don't need to. It's all fallacious. It's all fallacy. Yeah, they're not very forthcoming with their future plans. We know where they are because we've seen the movie. Unfortunately, it's a horror show in the Soviet Union, in Red China, in Cuba, in Vietnam, in Cambodia, where they killed 1/6 of the population. In many places in Africa, so it always ends up badly. Whether it's Europe, Africa, Latin America, it doesn't matter where the culture is.
Okay, Mike. Let's take a step back because we may need to take 2 steps back because you grew up for the first 12 years in Cuba, so you really understand what the problems are. I grew up in America, and when I was a child and a teenager, Ronald Reagan was president, so I remember being part of the Cold War and wanting to defeat the Soviet Union. I have a sense of what communism is. But people who grew up after me, because once I was in college, the Soviet Union came down and communism failed. Right. So it doesn't take very many years after I began college that people don't even understand what communism was at all. And we've got the new movie out about Reagan, and that movie talks about the importance of bringing down the Soviet Union, but I don't know that it explains why that was so important and how people were oppressed. Can you elaborate on that, both from what you know historically about the Soviet Union or China or North Korea, but also about what you experienced even in Cuba?
Well, let me touch on the last point first, because I've heard this before, that since the Berlin Wall, the Iron Curtain falls in 1989, comes down, people behind the Iron Curtain, Czechoslovakia and Poland and Bulgaria, are free to travel. Prior to that, they couldn't leave. It was a jail, and then the Soviet Union is dissolved in 1991. So as you said, you were a teenager. You remember that during those days. But I should tell you that one of the salient features of American life, and this has been true from 1776 to the present, because America was founded in 1776, I hope you know, not in 1619, has been a really inordinate attachment to freedom. One that, as somebody who has not always lived in freedom, I've always puzzled, why are Americans so obsessed with liberty, even though they've never lost it? A good friend of mine, Jimmy Lai, who is now the world's most famous political prisoner, whom I met in Hong Kong. I lived in Hong Kong for 8 years. A good friend of mine, I know my friend's going to die in solitary confinement in prison. He once said to me, I used to go to his house all the time, and he put his arm around me, and he said, Mike, freedom is like oxygen. You take oxygen for granted. We would take breaths without thinking about it daily. But if somebody chokes you, then regaining access to oxygen is the number one thing on your mind. With liberty, it's like that. You take it for granted, but once it's taken away, it focuses the mind on how to escape, how to be free again. What always puzzled me was that the United States, well, not always, because I think I have an answer now, is that Americans, having never lost their freedom, are really, among the world's peoples, and I've lived all over the world, the ones who love liberty the most. And I think it is because the founders, in their wisdom, based this republic on natural rights. Natural rights are all over our founding documents, but they're also they're embodied in our institutions. So I think that even though we don't have the example of the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, I think many people, Americans, are still attached to liberty. But we still need to remind them of that. I absolutely agree with you. The Soviet Union, the Cold War, and I don't like to use that term because it really was a battle, as Reagan was completely right, between good and evil. It was, that battle, that epic struggle was the most important thing in my life until it ceased to be the most important thing in my life because the Soviet Union went away. But now we're fighting again against these new reconstituted Marxism inside our doors. If you want me to tell you about what it was like as a boy, as a child, really, because I left at the age of 11. I had just turned 12. That idea that somebody's choking you, has taken your liberty away, and it concentrates the mind on being free, that is what daily life is. That is the daily hell of your life, in saying, I want to be free, and yet I'm not. And for us, because we had asked to leave very early, we had asked to leave to leave the country in 1966. We were not allowed to leave until 1972. During that time, we just knew that maybe there was a point in the near future when we would be free, and that it was a daily hope and aspiration, but also a sense of desperation. You would wake up and you would find out that you were still in Cuba behind bars, really, because you couldn't leave the island. That and the fact that there were no products on the shelves. You know, we went to Europe first. I went to Spain, the land of my grandparents, and I remember it was there for the first time that I realized what shelves are for in stores. They were there to carry goods. Communism, one of the things it does, Marxism, it removes the price discovery mechanism of the market. So you instantly have shortages. You know, communism does not produce bread; it only produces bread lines. So the corner stores never had anything on the shelves. It was in Spain, in Franco's Spain, a poor country, that I said, "Oh my God, the shelves are full," and you can say anything you want. You can say anything you want, and nobody's going to cart you off. My parents lived they were terrified that I would speak my mind. I went to a private school until the government closed that when I was in second grade. I went to French school. And then the government closed that too, and there were no more private schools in Havana. And from second grade to the beginning of sixth grade, just a week into sixth grade, when we were allowed to leave, I had to attend communist schools. My parents were terrified that I would speak at the school the things that they were discussing at home, because and it was encouraged. We were encouraged to tell on our parents, and that is. Although we're free, I want to make sure that we're free here in America, even under Biden and Harris. We're going in that direction where they want to destroy families, and they want to take the authority of the family away. And this will be the last point of this segment. Alexandra Kollontai, the culture minister of the Soviet Union in the first one in 1917, said that children belong to the state. The children don't belong to bickering parents who don't know how to raise children. And that is the communist idea. And there were statues in the Soviet Union to this kid who had told on his parents, and the parents were taken away and executed. And this kid was celebrated as a hero. And that is the communist idea. And that is the horror that people who live in communism live through every day, Jenny Beth.
What is happening here in America? You just mentioned that we are free in America, but you think that it's encroaching here. So what is the current state right now in America, and where do you think it's headed if we stay on this same path?
Well, we're on a knife's edge. You know, we are fighting this right now. We either become free and free ourselves of these ideas, or we allow these ideas to tell us how to live. That means living in lies. I don't really care if people are gay, you know, but I'm not going to participate. I really don't care. But I'm not going to participate in the hallucination that a man can become a woman or a woman can become a man. And I'm not going to call a man a she or a woman a he. And for many Americans, if you don't do that, I will call them by the name they want to be called. You know, if a man wants to suddenly be called Susie, I will honor that. That is not living in a lie. That is just being kind to that man who wants to be called Susie. What I will not do is call him a she, because that's a denial of reality. And I have I've told myself that I cannot live a lie. So the idea that you could lose your job, you could lose your standing in society, you could be canceled culturally because you refuse to participate in a lie, that is a worrisome thing to many Americans. You know, I travel the country extensively. People say to me, yeah, you're very lucky, you know, Mike, you work for the Heritage Foundation. You don't have to do these things. You know, I would be fired, and my children would be without a provider. And I understand that. So what I do is I want to make sure that our leaders have the policies that will make that illegal, that will say, no, that infringes on the First Amendment, that infringes on the 14th Amendment, that infringes on the Constitution. We are free to live the way we want to, as long as, you know, we're not hurting other people.
And where what do you mentioned something about the family a minute ago and how the Soviet Union encouraged people to tell on their parents and that children belong to the state. Why is that important? Why is the destruction, when you mentioned that Marx says to destroy everything, why is it important to destroy the family as well?
Jenny Beth, you really should do this for a living because you're very good at it. That's also in the manifesto. Abolish the family. Those 3 words are in the manifesto. Abolish the family. And why is that, Jenny Beth? Because the family is the most basic institution of civil society. It is pre-political. It is pre-state. When our ancestors were in the forest, they had a family. And when we were nomads and hunter-gatherers and all that, we had families. So that pre-political institution has to be destroyed. Has to be denigrated and destroyed in order for them to have the destruction, the societal and systemic destruction that they want.
And do you think that that's happening here in America right now?
Well, the family is definitely under threat. The family, I mean, again, to go back to the sexual hallucinations, if a mother or a father say, no, actually, we don't want our 14-year-old child to be to have surgery. We don't want she or he to be mutilated, to have perfectly reasonable, healthy organs cut off, mutilated. That the child can now be taken away. I think that is the case in the state of California.
Yes.
Or if it's even shorter than that, if a son tells the school that he wants to be called a she, the school is not allowed to tell the parent that in some states. That is an infringement on parental rights. That is an attack on the family. The teacher is going to forget that child's name in 5 years' time. My wife and I spent countless conversations deciding what our 3 children would be called. We gave them names that were names that had been in our families, or names that had to do with the places where they were born, names that were significant and meaningful to us. We love them best than anyone else. We know them best than anyone else. Not the teacher. That's not the teacher's child. That's not the principal's child. And that's not the school board child. It's not the school district's child. It is our children.
Yes, it is. And it's very disturbing to see these trends in California and Minnesota and Washington State and other places around the country where they're infringing on these parental rights. And if you are a parent honestly, if I were a parent in those states, I would get out. And maybe it's hard to imagine that because you live there and you can't imagine leaving what is your home and your livelihood. But man, it isn't like that in other states, in Georgia and Florida and Tennessee. And there are many other states where you actually can live free without that threat.
And it's not just sexual stuff, Jenny Beth. In Tim Walz's Little People's Republic of Minnesota, he has just passed an ethnic studies standard, which will orders to indoctrinate children and to using race as a revolutionary tool. I have looked at the Minnesota ethnic standards. They're pure Marxism. Tim Walz signed the bill that included that ethnic study standard, rather. Sorry.
And in the states, like I just mentioned, Georgia, Tennessee, Florida, where you're free and you don't have to worry that your children may be taken from you if you don't agree to mutilating them. Even in those states that we're running into major problems in the school system and in other aspects of the life because Marxism is being taught at school, whether the teachers even understand that that's what they're teaching or not. When they get into critical social justice theory, isn't critical social justice theory Marxist? And it's embedded inside of textbooks. They don't have to say this is what critical race theory is. They just present arguments that actually adhere to that theory. and they present it as facts in many textbooks across the country.
Yeah, critical race theory is Marxist. It was conceived by Marxists. They call themselves Marxists. Richard Delgado, who was at the opening conference in Madison in 1989 that began critical race theory. He wrote later, said in an interview rather years later, because it was held in a convent, and he said it was very ironic. We were there, a bunch of Marxists, inside a room with stained glass windows. So critical race theory is completely Marxist. It just so happens that tonight I'm going to go to my son's school visit. And I know that the social studies teacher is going to say, or the history teacher is going to say, we in this county do not practice critical race theory, but however we will teach, we will give the students the tools to understand our systemic racism, and the fact that white supremacy. He'll say something of that in that order, which means that they do, because those are that's the basic tenets of critical race theory. It's these ideas, these crazy ideas that we have white supremacy and that we have systemic racism in this country. We have, as you know, I'm sure you're well aware, and I know that we have ugly racists in this society, just like we have in all societies. I don't think we have more racists than other countries do, but we have rapists too. We have murderers. We have thieves. Man is fallen, but they don't want to look at it that way, Jenny Beth. They say, well, no, the individual racist does not matter. Do not spend any time talking about the individual racist, because what matters is the racism embedded in society, the systemic racism, and that is really what I have issue with. I think racism is an individual sin. We're not doing what Christ, the message he left us with, love one another. We're not loving somebody because he happens to be of another race. That's a sin, and in many cases also a crime if you implement it. But they don't care about that. To them, it is American society. Everything we do, the Boy Scouts, the car you drive, taking a walk, these are all racist actions. That is crazy and not true, and we have to fight against it.
You're right. We do have to fight against it. And one of the dangers, I think, in saying, well, the cause is systemic racism, or the cause is systemic problems, whatever they may be, it absolves the individual of their responsibility if they're doing something wrong individually. And it lets them off the hook if they individually are racist. You're blaming something much bigger than that. And I guess that's a point, because Marxism wants to destroy all of the systems of government, and not just the government, but just all of our systems in general to replace it.
Right. They call it systemic racism for a reason, Jenny Beth. System is just a Greek word that means the way everything works. So they want to destroy its system. If we have systemic racism, and ergo, the logical conclusion is that we have to change the system. And that's what they want to do, as we started this conversation by saying. They want systemic change. So they say, well, and you just alluded to this, the existence of racial disparities is prima facie evidence of systemic racism, which it isn't. They can't just assert that. They have to show some evidence, and there's nothing in the social sciences that proves that. And the studies that they have are not replicated. They're written in sand. What is in the social sciences, for example, is how the dissolution of the family does lead to disparities, does lead to truancy in school, does lead to criminality, does lead to jail, does lead to poverty. You grow up without a father in a home, and I think you have a 92% chance of ending up in poverty. And you go to a prison, and you will see that many of the men who are in that prison did not have a father at home. The vast majority will not. So that is completely backed up by the social sciences and by evidence. Let's look at that. Let's go, oh my God. We've had rampant out of wedlock births in our society now. Some groups are worse hit than others, but it is a killer in all groups. It is a killer. It's a colorblind problem. No. The disparities which are real are not based on systemic racism. They're based on the background variables such as family formation, access to bad schools, all these things.
So what do you think can be done here in America? How do we solve the problems? But wait, before we do that, I want to take one step back. We have a situation right now where we've got a candidate for president who was raised by a Marxist. Her father was a Marxist. We have a vice presidential candidate who is a Marxist. We have the head of the Department of Transportation who was raised by Marxists. What do you think? How concerning is it to you, having studied Marxism and communism and socialism, how concerning is it to you to see that children of Marxists are taking such big roles and responsibilities in our government, and they're leaning that way? It's not like they were raised by a Marxist and they've realized that capitalism and natural rights are the better way. They're still leaning that way. What do you think when you see people who are Marxist or have Marxist tendencies rising up in our government?
Now, we used to call that red diaper babies. And there's a reason for that. Red diaper babies tended to be Marxists themselves. The children of I was just talking just an hour ago. I was just talking to somebody in Congress, and she said, "Well, nobody's responsible for their parents." And I said, "Well, actually, I'm a pretty good product of my parents. I'm exactly like my parents were, in many ways, not in all ways, obviously. But in the two of the three cases, I don't know that much about Tim Walz." But you mentioned Kamala Harris, our vice president, and Pete Buttigieg, our secretary of transportation. In his case, his father was Joe Buttigieg, who was the foremost Gramscian scholar in this country, and Antonio Gramsci. I spoke very briefly because I didn't want to bore you to tears about the leap to cultural Marxism in the 1920s. A lot of that, most of that work was done by Antonio Gramsci, the founder of Italy's Communist Party, who died in the 1930s. He was not really fully translated until 1970. And the best translator was Joe Buttigieg, Pete Buttigieg's father, who was a founder of the founder and president of the International Gramsci Society. Now, Pete Buttigieg likes to go around and say, "My father was an immigrant," and you get the sense, because we tend to think this way in America, that his father was, a factory worker with his lunch pail, his lunch bucket that his wife gave him when he left the house, going over to the steel pipe to smokestacks. What was the factory in South Bend, Indiana, Jenny Beth? It was Notre Dame University, where Joe Buttigieg was a tenured professor. And in the case of Kamala Harris, I'm going to give away the punchline here, because I'm going to have a paper coming out either today or tomorrow that I co-written with Jonathan Butcher, with whom I've co-authored pieces for years. And one of the things we find was that Kamala Harris's parents actually met in a social studies program at Berkeley in 1961 that was so leftist that it was there that Bobby Seale met Huey Newton. And who are these two guys, Bobby Seale and Huey Newton? They founded the Black Panthers. The founders of the Black Panthers met at this study group where Kamala Harris's parents met. They were that radical.
Wow. And I don't think that you can escape that kind of radicalism. If that's what you grew up around, it's what you're going to know, what you're going to be familiar with and comfortable with, and what you lean to as foundational knowledge when you're making decisions.
Yeah, in the case of Tim Walz, I don't know that much about him. I know that he went to China 30 times, paid for by institutions inside the PRC, the People's Republic of China. That money has to have come with the acknowledgement, if not the direct involvement, of the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. 30 times is a lot of times. I lived in Hong Kong 8 years, and when I was a foreign correspondent, I went to China a lot. Not a single time was that paid for by the CCP. And in fact, they canceled my visa at one point, and I would have difficulty going back because I was interviewing without government approval. So very different cases between me and Walz.
Very different. And you have a friend now who is suffering and imprisoned.
Yes.
So what do you think the solutions are and what can be done? Obviously, we've got an election coming up, and we can work on that. But what else can we do as individuals?
Well, what you and I are doing right now is very important. And I thank you for giving me this platform in talking about these issues. This is really important. And I hope I have been clear enough and not weedy so that your listeners and people watching this show can come away with an understanding. They can come to my Twitter account. It's Gonzalez, Gundisalvus. They can visit heritage.org. They can read my books, or they can. But then we also have to convince people and convince them. I don't smile enough, as you can tell, but we don't have to be. We don't have to be grumpy about it. We can talk to our fellow Americans and say, look, this is what is happening. We're in a free country. These are the ideas they want to teach you in universities. Like when you go to a museum, that museum has been, quote unquote, decolonized. And I'm going to show you how they have decolonized that museum. What are the messages they send you in that museum? When you go to a library, the books that you're going to see in the top shelves are going to be all about one issue or on one side of the aisle. When you go to the theater, likewise, ditto for the movies. It's all so reveal for them the hidden agendas, so they can make their own minds when they watch and consume these things. These cultural Marxists, these NextGen Marxists that Katharine Gorka and I write about, have been very adept at taking over the cultural institutions, the institutions in charge of making meaning, of creating intellectual content. Communists used to say that they wanted to own, the government should own the means of production. And now it is owning the means of production of meaning, and that matters to them. That's the cultural Marxism that I was referring to.
It's very important. I hope people go and they buy your book and read your book and become very familiar with what it means when we're raising these red flags about Marxism and socialism and communism right here in America. It's something I'm sure that when your family left Cuba, they never imagined having to fight communism and socialism in America.
America is my cause. I'm not gonna shirk from this battle.
Well, I am very, very thankful that you are not, and I'm thankful for the education that you're doing. You've helped to educate me over the years, and I know that you're doing that with many other people around the country. And I think it's very important that we understand the battles that we're up against, so that we can guard our liberty and protect our liberty. Mike,
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
The Jenny Beth Show is hosted by Jenny Beth Martin, produced by Kevin Mooneyhan, and directed by Luke Livingston. The Jenny Beth Show is a production of Tea Party Patriots Action. For more information, visit teapartypatriots.org.
If you like this episode, let me know by hitting the like button or leaving a comment or a 5-star review. And if you want to be the first to know every time we drop a new episode, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for whichever platform you're listening on. If you do these simple things, it will help the podcast grow, and I'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much.